Autotelic Foundation.
Thank you, Nadim. Thank you for bringing us to Vienna. Also, it's like such a beautiful city, and it's been really nice and thought-provoking to be here. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and fathers and, grown-up friends of small children. You will probably see our daughter Coco wandering in, and I think we're just going to be flexible with that and just kind of let that happen as it needs to happen. Okay, so I tried to throw together a talk that, I'll just read it. Basically, it's like 3/4 of the way written, and then we're going to free associate, and maybe you're going to help me do this, and then at the end, Julian's going to come, and then at the end, Nadim is going to come and also facilitate questions or comments. So let's get into this. All right, so I can't stop. Oops, I had to figure out how to advance this, though. That's also important. Does that work? Yeah, okay. Wait, oh, goodness. Wait a minute. Hold on. Where's my... Okay, you would think because I deal with, like, digital stuff, I'd be seamless with this, but I'm not. Why is this... Can somebody... Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, does this work if I just do that? Yes, okay. Great. I can't stop trying to diagram how media works now. And if you've ever heard a talk from me, you've probably seen some other version of this before. Don't try to make sense of it. You don't have to. I have these note cards and these various elements, and I keep recreating the scene again and again and again. In part because media, while always evolving, is currently undergoing an intense period of reorganization. Obviously, this weekend has shown this in many ways. And in part because I have a pathological conviction that if we only had a clearer common understanding of how media flows, we'd be able to better understand how it works on us or what kind of us it's now producing. To be sure, we are always becoming a new kind of human. And I was reminded of this yesterday visiting the Beethoven frieze at the Succession. Most here are already well familiar with the story, but Gustav Klimt's mural was a big scandal at the time because in an exhibition that was intended to honor the life of Beethoven, Klimt rendered his contribution in an aesthetic that was totally anathema to the old guard's idea of how the human spirit should be depicted. Max Klinger's Beethoven Denkmal, by contrast, was a Rodin-like figure of Beethoven that follows the rules of classicism. The body is voluminous. It's individuated. It's like one big hunk, right? It's tethered to the earth. The head, which was understood to be the site of knowledge and the God-given soul, is heavy, full, ponderous. The fist is clenched in a demonstration of a uniquely primate capacity for a prehensile grip, right? So this is a very particular formation of the human. By contrast, Gustav Klimt's Beethoven frieze features diaphanous bodies that seem to merge with their surroundings and each other. In this detail of the longing for happiness figures, the bodies are cloud-like, they're sensorial, a current of energy that cannot be contained or individuated. Defending Klimt, turn-of-the-century literary figure Herman Bahr, who happens to be the name of the room we're staying in at the hotel, so I felt compelled to add this whole little section in because it was providential or something. I don't know. Also, okay, I can tell you afterwards. Anyway, defending Klimt, turn-of-the-century figure Herman Bahr, one of the secessionists' biggest stands, wrote about the fundamental conflict in an understanding of who or what the human subject is. In Bahr's word, when classicism says man, it means reason and feeling. When romanticism says man, it means passion and the senses. And when modernity says man, it means nerves. I take this quote from Emmeline Butterfield Rosen's absolutely brilliant book. And in fact, some of that analysis before is taken from her book as well, Modern Art and the Remaking of the Human Disposition, which explores a pivotal change in our conception of the human subject around the turn of the 19th century, and shows how so much of the cultural conflict of the time can be connected to coinciding yet very different understandings of what it meant to be human. I wasn't even going to mention this in this talk, but after seeing the Beethoven frieze again and that thing with the hotel room, I just can't get Emmeline's work and Bahr's quote out of my head. Oops. When classicism says man, it means reason and feeling. When romanticism says man, it means passion and the senses. When modernity says man, it means nerves. 3 different understandings of what it means to be human. For some time, I've had the sensation that we are living between two informational worlds. The one we think we know, as pictured here by Karl Lagerfeld's private library, and the one that actually exists. The former was organized by writing truth and fact. Most of us alive today are trained for that world, calibrated to it. But deep down, we don't fully believe it anymore. Deep down, we can sense that the world we must navigate operates really differently, and yet it's difficult to parse exactly how. Deep down, we know that the world we think we knew is gone. It's my conviction that a lot of confusion, a lot of suffering even, comes from us becoming a new kind of subject, yet trying to relate to each other and to our media as if it were a different era. When the Klimt and the secessionists were pushing back against the old regime, they were influenced in part by media, the ascendance of wider spread press and an interest in playing with artistic critical feedback loops. I mean, that's an entire talk in itself. But also responding to scientific and philosophical breakthroughs. For instance, Darwinism and humans being a part of rather than superior to nature, as well as an idea of an individuated soul and intelligence rather than it being something more collective that each of us tap into. Maybe there's an allusion to AI here, right? This idea of not being an individuated human, but being part of some kind of like collective substance. Anyway, let's see. With this short talk, I want to try something that on the surface may sound very boring and like something everyone in this room already knows, but I think that somehow by walking through the elements and really visualizing on the simplest basis how linear media is different from network media, we might better understand what kind of subject we now are, and in the early era of neural media, are now becoming. Like it's really broken my brain. Kay Alado McDowell last year put out this taxonomy of media, and I've read it like maybe 30 times, and I just, for some reason, it's this like incredibly useful framework, and I just feel somehow passionate that if I can convey this to another group of smart individuals, that it will like also help unlock something for you. Even though what you're about to see seems so basic and simple, you're like, why are you telling me this? But I hope it's kind of like if you go into like a yoga studio to meditate and they're like, think of nothing. It's like on that level. I hope you feel it. Like, I'm really not trying to insult your intelligence here. I hope you see what I'm seeing, or otherwise you think I'm crazy, that's also fine. Anyway, okay. Oh yeah, so the three parts of media, yes. Okay, so example. And part of this little bit I'm taking from a previous talk, but global fast fashion retailer Shein lists thousands of new items to its site every day. There are no collections, there's no seasons, there's no indication of a world in which a particular set of objects might make sense. At a glance, the garments and other goods listed seem totally random, organized by a marketing strategy that feels really far from the practice of 20th century retailers. Think Abercrombie & Fitch tapping Bruce Weber and Slavoj Žižek for its substantial late 90s, early aughts quarterly publication. But there is a logic to retailers like Shein and Temu, etc. And it's a logic that leads to, in Shein's case, shipping nearly 1 million orders per day. So it's like this is a successful way of organizing objects in the retail space now, right? It generates a gross annual sales that, when adjusted for inflation, is more than 6 times the volume of Abercrombie at its height. Of course, Abercrombie sold mostly only clothes into a predominantly American market, whereas Shein offers not just fashion boxers, but also tongue scrapers and glute strengthening equipment. But still, this comparison will allow us to easily visualize 2 eras of media. One in which the human is something of an endpoint, a subject who receives a piece of content and desires to participate in the world of that content, and so steps into that world, makes themselves in the image that they are presented with. And then another, wherein the human mind is the render surface, right? The human mind is the render surface when we're looking at sites like Shein. For me, that's a big unlock. I hope that helps you as well in some way. The human must hold the fantasy in their mind and then scan the media for cues that allow them to project meaning onto the content. In the first example, Abercrombie, desire is in the image, right? Like young bodies, classic. In the second, Shein, desire is seated on the subliminal level. A panting tongue, right? Like with the tongue scraper. A big toned ass, obviously. I mean, boxers, whatever, like gilded boxers, you know, there are a lot of associations. But the narrative that compels someone to click on an object and then click buy comes from within them. It comes from within the receiving subject. That is like a fundamental shift, almost on the level of like Gustav Klimt being like, oh, the human soul isn't just in the head as we've been told for a long time. It's actually like something that the diaphanous human body taps into. I think there's like such an interesting correlation there that I only thought of yesterday, so I haven't really fleshed it out, but maybe it does something for you. I'm not sure. That's why I'm offering it. Okay, so we have it. Let's quickly set up a common picture of legacy or linear media. Linear is in relation to network and neural. So linear media, as it exists in a one-to-one relation to our lived experience, let's put it in real space, right? When we think of the Platonic idea of media, what comes to mind? Classic containers of information, right? Like the newspaper, TV, radio, a book. In the same category, we might put classic containers for entertainment and culture too. A music album, a gallery show, a film, a fashion collection. There's literally like an entire emoji section that's devoted to this kind of physical media. This is what we usually think of when we're like, oh, like I'm in publishing, I'm in music, or I'm in like the art world. We think of these objects. This is what we think of as the containers for transmitting ideas. The job of these containers is to transmit information-rich content from an expert to an audience. If something isn't informationally or culturally important, or won't build out the world that the publisher, producer, record label, exec, or gallerist, or whatever is aiming to build, it doesn't get distribution. Of course, there is a problem here with who gets to say what is informationally important or culturally important, but let's just bracket that for now. The relevant point is that in linear media, information is broadcast from an expert to a mass audience that, for the sake of this talk and this argument, is essentially a group of passive end consumers. Don't do any whataboutism. There's a lot there, but just for the sake of this talk, is essentially a passive end consumer who look to the media for narrative, for authority, for news, for truth. In this linear relationship, content is information rich. In some contexts, you'd even say it's the site of the creative act. It is certainly the container for the creative act, and it travels from expert to audience uninterrupted, something like a jet following its predetermined flight path. I know you all know this already, but I want you to have an easy-to-recall image of linear media apparatus in mind, right? I'm obviously leaving out all the circuits that underpin linear media, but again, that's for another talk. Relevant here is the relative simplicity of content's role in linear media. An expert creates a piece of An expert creates a piece of content, that content finds distribution, and an audience receives it. Our Abercrombie example is a relic of linear media. Back in the linear media days, people would scoff at magazines like Artforum and Vogue for being filled with ads, as if this explicitly commercial material were threatening editorial integrity. Of course, these pearl clutchers miss the point because, as in retrospect, the ad content is often much more interesting to unpack than the editorial, as it's the contextualizing ballast that gives the editorial its potential for edge, right? Like, the editorial gets to be edgy because, like, J. Crew ads or Abercrombie ads look like mid, so then they get to be, like, chic in comparison. Furthermore, it's often the same photographers who are shooting both. There is much more to say about magazines as proto-network media, and there's like a really interesting argument in that, but that too is for another talk. In an age of like digital media, everything can be like capitalized on or metabolized, and in Q&As you get all this whataboutism, but to get through a talk, like you just have to stick to one kind of logic in a linear sense and be that jet that just tries to get from point A to point B. It was so hard to write this because you can go on a million tangents. And in the era of AI, it's like so hard because like you're chatting with Claude and you're like, oh yeah, that's great idea. Let's go into that. Okay, but anyway. As content, this Abercrombie ad presented a fantasy world for its audience who would consume it by looking through the images and maybe buying some of the pieces. Unlike a later era of this market with brands such as American Apparel, era of the Cobra Snake, or Brandy Melville, era of Instagram, there was no immediate mechanism during this time for Abercrombie's pre-network media customers to be discovered by Abercrombie and folded back into the marketing effort. The brand's success hinged on the narrative power of its content, whether that's its ads, its lavish publications, or the brick-and-mortar retail experience it offered. The all-importance of the content element in linear media cannot be underestimated. Most of the laws and norms that we have in relation to communication were created with linear media in mind, whether that's freedom of speech, or copyright, or notions of authorship, or authenticity, or a sense of a mainstream society and its subcultures, or the practice of fact-checking and publications of record, or the very idea of communicating truth, right? all of these things can be practiced or at least straightforwardly adjudicated in some way within the structure of linear media, because the components are easy to observe and exist in a one-to-one relation to the human layer. Both the financial gains of success and the liability of error correspond to the primary actors. There is minimal alienation. So this is the linear apparatus. But communication has grown more complex. So this diagram quite obviously no longer describes our experience of media. For the past decade or so, people have been predominantly accessing linear media via a structure we'll call network media. As network media does not share a reality plane with linear media, let's put it in a non-space. As with linear media, content remains central, although it operates really differently here. We'll get to that in a second. Often the content of network media often comes prepackaged as linear media, right? So that's often the bait. A magazine article, a new album, an art biennial. You might think of in mind the Whitney biennial, or any biennial gets protested, right? That's a piece of content that then will go through the network media machine and change, and it becomes something else. If it sounds like I'm stating the obvious here, I do this because I want to hammer home a picture of linear media as a kind of self-contained apparatus, and the one to which the formal structures of society are still tuned, and to which we humans are evolutionarily adapted. However, it is a framework that does not account for the infrastructural imaginary that actually organizes society now. And you can imagine that kind of tension, going back to the Beethoven exhibition. So much of our confusion in recent years, our inability to talk to each other clearly stems, I think, from our inability to see these layers of media as separate and to collectively admit how beyond linear media is acting on us. We know all of the techlash narratives, and in turn, we tend to moralize linear media and its norms as more righteous, showing the behavior that's emerged more recently as depraved. For instance, people will say Gen Z can't read, or X outlet doesn't fact check, or getting mad about images that are AI generated. My mom told me she was going to stop using Facebook because the images were AI generated, and she didn't know it was real or not anymore. It's a very interesting shift. But this prevents us from thinking more constructively about how to survive the media ecosystem that actually does exist now, which is more like this. I want to get back to Shein and some more contemporary examples in a second, but first let's build out a working model of network media. As we said, linear media is one component of network media. It supplies its content. But as audience members have become users, linear media is no longer received as information in the legacy sense. Rather, it is, from the user's perspective, raw material for building up one's digital identity. And from the platform's perspective, it's stimuli for eliciting user engagement. The platform doesn't care what's posted so long as it generates activity. The user doesn't really care what's posted either, so long as it can use that information as raw material to create a hot take about it, right? Or to regram it or to somehow remediate it. And by the way, this is my hot take on why hot takes are over. Because hot takes are not primarily about spreading information or understanding. Ultimately, they are about building the user's own reputation. That's what they are. They're in some way kind of selfish. And I think what's really interesting also about the era of neural media, which we'll get to in a second, is that you start to lose authorship. You start to lose the ability to say that was my hot take or that was my meme. And maybe that's kind of an interesting thing. Hot takes feel very Milan, very the deck culture, very I'm gonna explain this as a creative agent, but I think that's done. Okay, except for my hot take, which about him being done. Okay, we call this user-generated content, or UGC, and within our network schema, it shares a level with classic linear content. Although we won't go too far into it, it's worth mentioning the containers of network media, as they are qualitatively very different from linear media's book or art gallery. On the one hand, network media is housed by server farms, these anonymous, windowless buildings in exurban settings through which all of our thoughts and desired are, in a way, it helps us render them and stored. On the other hand, network media is predominantly transmitted through an ever-present smartphone. In turn, all of network media is always accessible, always with the user, to the point where users begin to relate to the world as if it were a fully networked, apprehendable, interactive space, right? So this user, this subject, imagines the world in like a very, very different way. They imagine themselves as a subject in the world in a very different way. I could very easily digress here with the reading of the soy-faced Wojak as part of a pan-cultural archetype of a gaping mouth figure that appears across time to represent the passage between worlds, a kind of agony of being in a state of imminent transition, having the world you know ripped away, or being forced to, by fate to leave it. But I think that too is for another talk. Anyway, it's also part of the, it's part of the reason why this talk isn't finished in time, is I went down this rabbit hole, which is super interesting. There's like really like, this is the Wojak, right? In a way. I mean, obviously it's not really, but we're post-fact checking. So, you know, on some level it works, right? If I'm scanning and sensing an image world, if I'm being Abby Warburg up here, I'm like, oh, there's a relationship. I would put this in my atlas, I think. I am thinking of the gaping mouth figure, the network subject, as this liminal formation of the human between the world we know and the one that now, with AI, increasingly exists. As neural media runs on the user activity of network media, which is powered in part by the content of linear media, let's take one example and run all the way through what we just talked about. Okay, Anna Udenberg's a great example. She is an artist, you probably all are familiar with her. She makes an exhibition at Meredith Rosen Gallery in New York, Continental Breakfast. A physical audience sees the work, documents it, because they, in this formation, are network subjects, but are physically present in a context of linear media, right? So they're like physically seeing it in the linear arrangement. This is a classical formation of information transmission. And now I'm gonna freestyle, which is probably gonna be better, because I probably won't lose my place. That then can still become content, right? That is a gallery show that can become content for an expert, sorry, Dean, to write about in a publication. It would probably be Spike, but Art Forum felt more iconic. So like Art Forum. And then a receiving audience, this nice guy at some Balthazar-like place is reading, well, pretending Art Forum. And he's receiving it in a linear formation, right? That is like 1 degree of abstraction. It's totally possible. However, in network media, the work of art becomes a piece of content that's displaced, and so does the review. I mean, we saw this happen with Dean's article in Harper's that, like, you know, got tons of blowback. So both of these things exist as a kind of content for the, like, network subject, the soy-faced Wojak, to, like, the user to metabolize. And we see this on TikTok. I mean, maybe you all know, but like Anna's work got like billions and billions of remediations with bots with the name Anna Udenberg, because there was something about that artwork, I mean, all of her works, but this show I think is like where it really spiked, that just like drove the network crazy. So you just have like, you know, and everyone likes to put their own face in the TikTok, which I think is so interesting. Like they really need to like see their subject as part of this world. And so, yeah, there's just, you know, tons of people explaining what this means, but they're not critics in the, like, Dean sense, right? They're, like, doing something different. And then all of this material is content, but there's somebody outside of it. There's also you just, like, looking at going, like, what the heck? You also are a user, and you're trying to parse, like, what the sign value of this means when you're viewing it in relation to all of that. And do I have to pay attention to like this random French guy's reading of that? Is that an interesting way to understand what Anna's work does? Maybe it is. Like, I don't think Anna like specifically makes her work for like to get remediated, absolutely not. But interestingly, her work does play with some of these feedback loops of Shein and Temu and these kinds of new types of sites. So there's something that's like, I don't know, I think it's fitting to use her work as an example. But what we learn is that whereas in network media, you have this jet that's like, the job of the media is to like take information from the expert to the audience. And here, it's just to keep this body pumping. It's just to like make material like flow through a network, right? It's just to keep content moving. That is the job of content in the age of network media. Okay, so you don't really have to, you can't read this, but I just want to show you that like this is sort of where we're going with this, where you have like, so linear media is this really simple organization where the audience is like authentic, they're their actual self. There's a one-to-one relationship between the audience and who they are as a reader. By the time we get to network media, we start to have a little bit of alienation. The person is outside of the user. The person like puts on a user in a way to interface with this network media. And the network media, like when, you know, it's like when you see people, I was listening to Helen Molesworth talk to Dean about his piece. And Helen Molesworth, wonderful curator, and she was asking him about, does he want to, like, why is he upset about identity being in art? And like, you could just see that there was kind of a clash of Helen really thinking in terms of a more linear framework and, you know, in good faith. I mean, she really believes in publications and catalogs and exhibitions in their like one-to-one relation. And also, I know she also understands all this as well. I'm 100% sure she's brilliant. But you could see she was almost pushing an argument that felt like it was bound to the linear. Whereas Dean was saying, yeah, like, well, but identity, that's like this thing that like, you know, that's like this kind of neoliberal thing of identity. Identity is something that we sort of shop around. Identity is this thing that we capitalize on. We actually want to be free of identity. We want to be down here in what neural media is starting to allow us to do, which is to try on different users. As a person, we don't have to be the same user. You know, everyone is a dog on the internet. You know, everyone is a girl online, right? Like, and you can be these different kinds of individuals. And there's something that like feels really like late about the art world. I mean, I'm bracketing this. Obviously, like the art world was like a lot of white men for a long time, and that also wasn't cool. But I don't think in this era, like the idea of like, identity does just feel, it just feels bound to like an older time period. There's a whole thing here about, like, you could talk about the gold standard in linear media versus like mortgage-backed securities being like one level of abstraction and something that you capitalize on when you come to network media, because really it starts like in the 80s, this logic, or maybe 70s. You know, by the time you get to neural media, it's all like, you know, you have like meme coins and shit coins, and like any of these things can actually be more or less valuable. Yeah, I need to work that out better. But, okay. So, but if we get back to the Shein example, we can see that like the way that, you know, you kind of have to make, this is kind of raw material, like you make your own content from it. It's like those boxers, there's no narrative coming with those boxers. Those boxers just arrive. You have to look through here, and it has to like trigger something in your mind that fits into the narrative that you already have, like this like render interface that you already have in your mind, and then you click on it and then you buy it. We can see this, the Balenciaga gate is a good example of how this played out in practice, where this was a campaign for their like December gift like campaign, I guess, from 2023. And there were all these objects, which to me, I mean, it looks kind of like a Shein page, right? There are all these objects, they're like laid out like kind of without any kind of hierarchy. And, you know, to me, it just looks like, I don't know, and first glance, it just looks like a witty Balenciaga campaign with like all their objects on view. But if you were very online, you might see, you know, sacrifice, cannibalism, like, you know, child trafficking. You might read that into it, right? Because that's the narrative that you find exciting. So you're looking at something that is like pretty benign, and you're picking up on lots of symbols, and you're starting to, you know, the brain is the render interface. I then found, I was like searching for the image, and I found that you can actually like, in this like very weird, you can actually like buy that image. I don't know what happens if you actually like bought it, but you can add it to your cart and put in your payment information, which I think is kind of crazy. So there's like the kind of literal reification of these like conflicts that some random bot site has set up. You can also think about this in terms of like the White House's Twitter, which hopefully none of you spend too much time on or have to, and I'm sorry to bring American politics into this, but it's a really good example of this weirding, because it's like, it's kind of just all this, I mean, it's not totally random. Obviously, like the White House wants to, or, you know, or what, I don't know how conscious it is, but what it's doing is it's trying to like seed your ideas like in a mimetic way with all this crap material. Like this is slop. This is just like slop coming from the White House. And it's like, it's really like, it's just, I don't know how that is somehow fine and like this is somehow actually harmful. I mean, but I think we're all hallucinating. We're all in a state where we're somehow hallucinating. And some of it has to do with like, if you go back to the stage, all of this activity is like, it's creating information that is now being, like truths that are now being logged in models, right? So like, as data is scraped from all of these sites, all of our network activities, it's building up a picture of the world that then is like, is somehow like, it's somehow like used when I'm not sure how to exactly like simplify this, but we're somehow seeding this AI brain with truths that we have, and they're really like primal truths. And then you have it like in instance like this, where, I don't even know what to make of this. I really don't. I don't know what to make of this. But I think that I think that like the linear logic definitely can't help us. You can't just say that's not true, or that's bad, or that's not moral. Like, it's happening, and we have to find a way of relating to it. In a sort of more positive note, this is the participant list for the current Venice Biennale. There's like somehow like 750 participants, which is incredible. And Carlo Ratti, when he did this, I think was very clearly realizing that the primary architecture we need now is an informational one, right? If you were to go and spend, I think, like a few minutes with every single participant, now granted, many of those participants are headed under a single project, it would take you more than 2 weeks of consistently going through the biennial 8 hours a day to like see every single thing. Well, no one can pay for like a hotel that, in Venice for 2 weeks. So it's basically an improbability for all except for a very small portion of people. And so it's an interesting provocation. It's like the architecture that we need now is gonna have to be an informational one, because this content overload is the new norm. Basically, this is, I guess, the one-liner for the entire talk. We need to understand like how current media works in order to talk to each other. Otherwise, we're going to be continuously talking through us. And that's what I have prepared. Maybe Julian can join now, and we can talk through some of this stuff. But yeah, thank you. Do we need these? I guess in case people are outside. Yes? Okay. Okay. So Julian, I think both you and I, when you were working on your talk, we were both thinking about like how to sort of state the obvious. But I do feel like there are these. I have it broken up into these eras, which of course is a bit of a fiction. But I feel like it does help us understand like what the media is we're looking at better when we see it ensconced, sort of like swallowed by all the other layers of media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it's, to me, the problem is that so much of this stuff is so well theorized, and yet it's like the public, even the state, doesn't get it. I think about how J.D. Vance, Europe expressing concern, European governments expressing concern about X and its algorithm, and J.D. Vance saying, oh, well, we support Europe militarily. They should respect our culture of free speech. As if, like, X is a platform of free speech. That's a paradigm that does not apply to that form of media whatsoever. And the fact that there's even any, like, hesitation about free speech concerns for Europe to ban X, like, they should just ban it. It's not free. It's not a platform for free speech. At this point, it's kind of like the personal psyop machine of a South African billionaire that's like really brainwashing people into radical far-right beliefs.
But I also think the idea of free speech is also tied to the individuated user or audience member. And when you no longer have that idea, like the myth of the creative individual, like the individual as author, the individual as responsible for themselves, both in terms of their positive gains, but also in terms of whatever liability. I think especially when we're in the time of AI, like when production becomes like explicitly collective, if we're rendering something, if we're outputting something using a model, we're drawing from collective activity. And so I feel like we need to shift the idea of subject. And within that, then what is free speech? What you're allowed to output, or what's scraped in the model? Like, I wonder what free speech is when you're dealing with neural media.
I think free. I don't know. I mean, free speech is the I guess is there not being the absence of a threat or punishment for saying any particular thing.
You think about like the Balenciaga model, right? Like that ad campaign.
Right.
And like that was, and they put out effusive apologies because they didn't want to continue to inflame the network. Or I don't know what the logic was behind their response, but like, like that seems like it's pretty benign, but it was absolutely, the public is basically the adjudicators now of like, what is allowed to be said or what isn't. If the White House can do this like, like Ghibli studio, or no, like this, whatever, AI rendering of like, Trump as the Pope, right?
Right.
Like, that would be not an allowed image for a couple of thousand, for 2,000 years. That would be like not allowed, and suddenly it's fine. But like, I mean, not to, I don't know, pearl clutch about the Pope, but yeah, but then the Balenciaga ad is somehow like demoness.
Well, I mean, I think that's, I can't really, I mean, I think about free speech in the sense of there's also this aspect of free speech that I think is related to distribution, and it's like if you look at social media, there's like you can say whatever you want, but like if you tweet and nobody sees it, like, is it a tweet? Like, there's I mean, everyone's felt the algorithmic vibe shift that happened with Trump's recent election, where a lot of people who were like really hot during the Biden years, or even before when the tech platform owners were kind of on still on the liberal end politically, people who had like tons of engagement now are faced with like no engagement at all, and it's also like
That's
unsettling
true.
to see them kind of still repeating these habitual behaviors of like you'll see someone post a picture like looking cute, might delete later type post, dancing in a mirror, and you look back 4 years and they'd post this and they'd have like a couple hundred likes or whatever, and now it'll be like 5 people and one comment,
that's so
and they're
true.
still doing it. It's like actually like really sad, but also kind of shows how deeply ingrained these like this habitual kind of expression into the network has become. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks the entire thing is becoming unsustainable, and that we're going to have. I mean, I think part of the reason also maybe why we both did these talks that are kind of trying to restate or really organize like the thinking and the frameworks that have been really, we found really important and generative over the past few years, is because we can feel we're on the edge of this, of another paradigm shift.
Right.
And it's like, if we don't like solidify what this era we just experienced, what that actually was and how it functioned, we're going to be like 2 layers deep without orientation.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is already outdated. Like this is already like a smaller like frame within like what neural media is, right? And I feel like this internet is on the verge of collapse, or it's, empty internet theory. I think there's just so much content. There's infinity content that you can't really make sense of it, right? It's a trash heap. And then it's like, okay, so then who is the subject of neural media? If the soy face Wojak is like the user, the one who has to comment on what he sees, then who is, I think there's almost maybe something more peaceful about the subject that's to come, because I think that, well, I mean, I'm not sure about that.
I mean, it's gonna, I mean, it's like, it's already pretty much like a kind of cyborg expression since the age of since machine learning algorithms first came to social media platforms, because they are nudging and providing certain incentives and kind of telling you in a way what to do. I mean, the leak of the Mr. Beast creative, kind of his like creation Bible for his content, really explicitly stated that all he was doing was like A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing what the algorithm wanted him to make or most rewarded him for making, and really allowing it to guide him along this path. And of course, the algorithm is based on, you know, measuring human behavior and engagement en masse. So it kind of reduces human behavior into like this almost like primal, I think, non-conscious sort of like what gets people to click, what affectively gets them to engage and respond. So it is this weird recursive thing where the algorithm's directing us, but in some ways it's based on us collectively, and that's just like really intensified in the era to come, where with large language models and content, any kind of content just easily being generated. But I mean, it is good to remember that the AI era began with those machine learning recommendation algorithms, not with ChatGPT or Midjourney or whatever.
Right. I think there is something interesting, though, in like how the idea of the celebrity is changing. And this is a whole section I wanted to include, but didn't have time in the end to make the slides. But like, I think if we take like Charlie XCX as an example, or like, you know, the Brat phenomenon as an example, at first it felt really force-memed, and then it kind of took hold in this way. And in a way, it's like, I think you saw it briefly on here, she becomes this kind of context window for accessing everything online, right? Like, so Charlie sort of defines a space. You can imagine, I'm sure, you know, embedding is not a foreign word in this context. So it's like there's a Charlie XCX embedding, and then you can, as a user, you can, in almost like a dark forest, like cozy web way, you can make stuff in the content of Charlie, and she hosts it. I mean, we were talking about this, and you brought up the example of coral reef, like celebrity as coral reef.
Right.
Whereas in the time of like Madonna in the 90s, linear media, the star was this icon on stage. She was untouchable. She had a media apparatus around her where you could very seldom have access to her. And if so, it was probably physically as part of a mass, like in a stadium, or looking at an album cover where it was just her image. And now you have the like very relatable celebrity, the celebrity who like shows you her underwear and like not, I mean, I guess Madonna did too, but you know, like talks about like, you know, her tampon on stage or something, like in a very like, you know, get ready with me kind of way. And you see that that is a new, and like, you know, the get ready with me videos are, I think, the most popular kind of TikTok content, or definitely among the most, because it's like, I will show you behind the scenes of me. You can colonize me. I will be your context window to the world. I am the beauty expert, or I am like the sports enthusiast, or I mean, it's influencer model, but it's more than that, because now there is like a high dimensional space where this, like in sort of like the, you know, I don't know, whatever, high dimensional space, there is an embedding for Charlie XCX or for Hailey Bieber or for, you know, whoever, and you then as like a sub-user can make UGC that will be related to that embedding. And you start to view the world through these people. And she starts to, and because, you know, content is given meaning downstream, it's like the users who give an album meaning. It's not like you read the liner notes and like, oh, what did John Lennon mean by blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, you as the user give Brat meaning, or like Lana, like, I mean, you think of the stars, or like Cardi, right? Like, think of like the people who've become massive are, I mean, like, and now there's this new Lord thing, and now it's, I mean, I don't really understand, I'm sure someone here can explain it to me, why suddenly, like, there's like this attentional spike around Lord, but like, I think it has something to do with what users can project onto the stars.
Yeah, I mean, the coral reef metaphor is really based, it's like ends up being a piece of infrastructure that can give rise to like all of these ecosystems of entire ecosystems of like really diverse content production, and I think Charlie, like Brat Summer, needed to be force meme though to get the common point of reference.
Acceleration velocity.
Well,
right,
we're just to the point where it's familiar enough where people knew what you were talking about if you did it, which is something that, you know, in the time of linear media, everyone was watching the same TV shows, or you know, really had these common things to talk about, right? And now it's, of course, culture has become so fragmented that it is extremely valuable to get to a point just so that for anything, any piece of media that everyone generally knows what you're talking about, and so I think the force memeing was like necessary to get to that point. I mean, I think
the
about
clout bombing of like including all the
Right.
other, like, of course she would receive so many Grammys. I mean, she's a good musician, but she also included half of the other, contenders on her album.
It built also a world that you could
totally.
explore all these different paths, and so I think that it offered a complete world or ecosystem for people to explore and get involved in. And I mean, I think also though about just the kind of like mass recognition, right? There's been an explosion of live streamers like iShowSpeed or something, and I mean these people like stream for like 4 or 5 hours sometimes, and I'm just like, who has time for that?
Or like the Emma Chamberlain content, which is just like very like, here's my day.
But the thing is, you look at the popularity of these streamers, and then you look at like, I mean, they've literally studied this. It's like young people are like just hanging out less or just doing social activities less. And you think about these streamers become kind of like an ersatz hanging out, because that's essentially what you're doing when you watch them for 5 hours. But then you have something to talk about with friends and other people in your in IRL that actually they all know about, right? And before, I think it kind of ended up replacing what a popular television show. Yeah, there is still sports, but I mean, there's but if you aren't into sports, it's,
right?
But I think. There is still. I think sports are very important for that reason, and I've actually, I'm like so shitty at small talk because I don't watch sports, but sports.
David Rudnick's Twitter.
Sports should come back.
It's like 70% sports.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah, I think sports needs a revival. But I mean, Cardi is a really, really interesting example though, because I think there's probably more like. Cardi put out like Whole Lotta Red and like some of the earlier releases, and like that's what the fans like really, really liked. And then he wasn't putting out more stuff like that album, so the fans just started putting it out for him, basically.
Great
like there's
example,
more
totally.
Cardi songs like that are made by fans, and especially with AI now, they can just take his voice. Like there's this guy, Twin, like TWXN, who I think he's just like some white kid, but he like makes these like AI generated Cardi, Travis Scott songs, and then he makes music videos where he's all like dressed in Rick and like dancing around and has his face covered, like kind of just like puppeting like the Cardi form.
Yeah.
And like it's like millions and millions of streams on this like this guy who just is like, okay, I have a body, I'll just be kind of like the embodied avatar of what everyone's personal avatar of Cardi is anyways. And so now you have this competition between like real Cardi and like the Cardi that is basically like this like egregore Cardi or something that's imagined by all of the fans. The Cardi, they just manifested the Cardi they wanted into existence, and real Cardi is competing with that. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, but I think that's
actually really, that's it. That's
I mean,
the next era.
And the power of these things with mass recognitions or these avatars or like even brands, right? It's like you see there was like this little viral moment about how much it costs to actually make a Birkin bag or whatever, right? Or a Dior bag, and it was like 20 euros or something, 30 euros. And I was thinking though, like, no, actually, like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had this take, but now I actually like fully believe, no, that makes total sense. But like there should be like 100 euros worth of marketing also in that wholesale price, because to keep the kind of the power and recognition and the meaning space of that brand still to continue to hold, like it just requires that much marketing, that much
100%.
thought space manufacturing put into that bag to make it what it is. And I think that's like totally valid at this point, because
totally agree.
Nothing you'll just end up with Shein slop unless you're actually considering the like the mind material of that bag as like a valid expense and should be calculated into the retail
Like
price
go
of it.
Gorpcore if that's what you want. But that too has a
Or
mind
just
space.
go,
So,
just go Shein. But it's like, I mean that it's like really really valuable. Yeah.
Should we open up for questions, or people maybe have comments that they have their own thoughts, or?
Do you mind if I have a question? So this space, this coral reef, or this sort of like, I don't know, the manifestation of the Cardi B you wish existed, is that part of
Playboy Cardi.
Yeah, Cardi, sorry, yeah, of course, Playboy Cardi, yeah. Is that in neural media space? Yes. I mean, okay.
Well,
And
we're in
but
we're
that's
in
just
between.
okay,
Yeah.
so that's like the kind of first part of the question. But how does this relate to the concept of like the universe? I mean, like, you know, when I say like, and I think a lot about, for a long time, sadly, about WWE. Like World Wrestling Entertainment, they always talk about the WWE universe, the same way as like the Marvel universe is sort of in kind of the Hollywood, space. And I mean, I'm just provoked immediately by this idea of manifesting, Playboy Cardi. I feel like wrestling fans manifested Trump as, the wrestler. Well, it was already there, kind of. He had a cameo, but they wanted more of this like domination. I found it pretty interesting that the head of the education department is the former COO of the COO of WWE is like currently dismantling the Department of Education. So I just like tell me about universes versus like, I don't know, coral reefs or like whatever this sort of thing, like the universe as it appears in culture.
I mean, in the way you're using it, though, you're using universe as world. I mean, of course, Marvel universe sounds better than Marvel world, which sounds like Disney World. So you're using universe. But I think, like, so if you mean like universe in terms of like universes, they're plural, or yeah.
But I think the universe is like, I mean, it's funny when all of this is taking place in a simulation, but like the universe is kind of the thought space or the symbolic space, and the coral reef, like that's the material, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's like also, the any of the things in the thought space can be used as material. So maybe I guess they're kind of the same thing, but I think certain material invites, it's kind of calls for being used as a resource or material to remediate, to make your own content. I mean, the Brat cover being like this green with this like regular ass font, like it's just like, of course, that's just like this obvious bait to invite you to make your own permutations of it. And I think, I mean, the Marvel expanded universe is all about characters, right? I mean, all of the different characters in the universe. And so, I mean, you can, of course, like, yeah, you could make like weird like children's videos on YouTube with the Marvel expanded universe like burying each other alive or whatever. I don't know if you've seen this. That sounds really crazy unless you've gone into the dark AI YouTube hole. But I think, generally, yeah, I mean, it depends how the universe is used and how much it invites remediation, how much it invites the user to use it as a material in their own content production.
Which, in the White House's case, is a lot right now. Like, in some ways, you can imagine they're putting out this content so that users, like, it's bait.
They
like,
want to be used.
They want to be used. And it's like their new idea of democracy. And again, I don't think it's necessarily conscious as opposed to just sort of like, they're just sort of rolling with it. But they want there to be, like, users, like, responding, liking, like, getting upset about it. That is democracy in action. Look at all these people responding to what we're doing, right? I think that, but then I think there's an interesting question, too, especially in the time of like shit coins and like currency multipolarity. Like, okay, is each universe essentially gonna have a kind of currency? At what point does like, because like in shit coins, meme coins, it's like the image is valuable, right? It's like the image plus the idea.
It's just attention.
It's attention, right? But it's like at a certain point, all of these, like you start to have a merger of like, a dollar is just, I mean, like, yeah, what these different how these different currencies work when the image and the value and the meaning are all sort of placed in the same arena.
Yeah, I
I'm
get.
not,
I mean,
you know, like
well, it's really
Trump
hard to
is
put your.
introducing America to image. There's like an image of America,
Yeah,
and it's like a
absolutely.
game space, right? That gets to be played.
I mean, I mean, the United States has been like, has it's been consumed by its own like fiction making apparatus for like a really long time.
It's part of what
at
made
this
it America.
point.
I mean,
Yeah,
initially,
absolutely.
Right? Also,
I mean, I think about. I mean, I think it began. Yeah, I mean, right? It went off, as you mentioned, went off the gold standard into fiat. But then, of course, they like really embraced the Friedman doctrine, Milton Friedman's idea that the only social responsibility of a corporation is to increase the returns to its shareholders, increase profits. So you're basically tying like the entire economic infrastructure of the country to this abstract
appearance of value.
metric,
Right,
yeah,
like-
right, which also can be gamed. I mean, any computational system is
Exactly.
always going to be hacked, right?
Exactly.
And it's also like with blockchain, they design these like toy like worlds trying to be like, oh, we can code in community, like, and it's like
Whoa.
it always, you can't, it doesn't work that way. They're gonna someone's gonna hack it. Like, there's gonna find a way that you did not like. Someone's going to find a way around the constraints you tried to put in brackets, and it doesn't work. And I think now the United States is kind of like tied all of social activity to this, after tying like economic activity to this like abstract kind of this abstract system of like fiat economy and pure financialization. It's like now they've tied all of the kind of thought world of the country to social media and to this like abstracted symbolic realm of the internet. And when you do that, it's just, you just see reality like crumble, right? And I mean, the United States is like not even a first world country at this point anymore. We're from there, and it's like the amount of decay is like just like mind blowing after living in Europe for 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's bad when you lean all the way into some abstracted, simulated space for managing your a society or human affairs. It just doesn't seem to work.
Yeah. Is there Klaus?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to come back to this question of why does Balenciaga not get away with it, and the White House can do this kind of stuff, and I was.
Good question.
Yeah, and I was thinking around this picture that you have behind you as well, right? Where it's kind of every user is equal, but obviously that's not the case. And it nearly feels like freedom of speech is about what is acceptable from whom, for whom, and then it's not, so who has the right to do certain and say certain things because of the way they've been positioning themselves, and of course Balenciaga can not do the same thing as Trump and vice versa. But then it's also about who has the bigger hose to flood the zone. It's like, and it's you brought in distribution, and I think that's really key. So it's nearly like the expert in your image has been replaced by the people who massively flood the zone. It's like, that's why all the podcasters are now the famous people. They are basically just talking to people. But that's what's important. It's not so much the content you produce, but yeah. So yeah, I think it would be really interesting to try to complexify these images with the characters in it.
Oh, you can complexify it and endlessly complexify it.
Yeah.
Wait, you
No, go ahead.
No, I don't. You were excited
okay.
about.
No, I'm just saying. Yeah, I think
my
that
head started spinning.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I do think that's really right. And that's why, I mean, there's this whole idea of like protocolism, or like the creative act has migrated upstream, if we think about it left to right. I don't know if that's a useful way, but to the area of the platform or the protocol, that is where the creative act can happen, or way downstream at the level of a user who's able to create something with enough mimetic gravity that ends up like really gaining traction. But the middle space, I mean, that middle space is just like a dead zone. Like, content is in zombie mode. I keep thinking that. And I mean, I say that as someone who makes content, right? Like, it's very demoralizing making content knowing that you're actually in this middle zone. But you know, our audience is small enough that we still sort of work in a linear structure, more or less. So I don't know. But I think, yeah, you're right. There's no free I mean, obviously Trump gets to do this because Elon's his best buddy, and so buddy and chief, whatever. And so he can, like, you know, make that content go to the top and never be banned and ban trolls, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think of this administration as just being like, it's made for the media space, not for real life, and it's really, like, I think of Hegseth and his like crusader tattoos, right? He's like has some narrative in his head, and he's even covered himself in the symbols of this like
chaos magic
narrative that he has, and it just kind of. We also have, I mean, the free speech thing. I don't know quite how to answer, but I do know we're in this like time of like epidemic of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people who people who know a little about a subject overestimate their knowledge of it, and people who know a lot about a subject underestimate their knowledge of it. And you think about someone like Joe Rogan, and he's just like Dunning-Kruger cruise control, you know, and he's the most popular podcaster in the United States, at least. And you just think about a guy with that much influence who's like just kind of like reading Wikipedia, or like, Jamie, print out that Wikipedia before the interview, and that's like the extent of his knowledge. And that's like, I don't know quite how to get experts back into the like the media ecosystem in any kind of impactful way, but.
That's a really important question, actually.
It is, yeah.
Because, and this is again why I like wanted to bring up linear media versus network, because a lot of them still like follow the manners of linear media. Like, well, I'm going to do a hard-hitting article in Grey Room or October or whatever that's going to really map this out. But obviously, ivory tower syndrome, that's not going to be seen. And they also like don't really let in the reality of how what they do circulates.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's like it kind of just bums me out that like, I mean, I was reading this like Luciana Parisi text from 2014 or something, talking about like Whitehead's idea of prehension, like the kind of like non-conscious affective priming of once you engage with a piece of content, and all of the kind of non-conscious ways that are algorithmic media shapes us and primes our responses. And it's just such like a rich and like really important theorization of what's happening, like, you know, right at the time it's happening. And the fact that it could not, it never found its way to the public even after 10 years, you know, like there's got to be, I mean, I go back to thinking about how McLuhan, The Medium and the Massage, right? That was published as a paperback book for what that cost $1. That was in like every single drugstore in America. Like, and in a way, I feel like that was like the last in the 60s. It was like the last attempt to actually bring media theory to like the mass public. And for some reason, they're just like entirely isolated. So that the people in this room know what's going on, but this is like 0.0010001% of the public, and the rest of the 99.99% has like no good model for the way this media works. And it's also hard for us to write things like this, because in a space kind of in between a more mass audience and a more academic one, it's like we feel this like compulsion to like communicate this stuff more and more, to get the public to actually, or get more people to understand it. And then at the same time, we're scared that we're just going to be saying things that everyone already knows.
Yeah, so obvious,
so it's actually really frustrating to feel like you want to communicate this stuff to everybody, but then you have fear of saying the
maybe there's
same
other
thing.
questions before we psychoanalyze it.
I'm sure there's a burning question or comment in the room. Surely. Yes, over there.
Hi, I wanted to go back to maybe things that you were talking about before with issues of identity building and this whole universes that you also brought up, and how do we navigate that. And I was wondering how the notion of transmediality sits within that, with the constructions of identity across various mediums, and I don't know, with the descriptions that you were giving of the coral reef.
What do you mean by transmediality in this context?
Well, the notion of transmediality defined by more like by popular media. So basically, like big models, and you guys were talking about Star Wars and stuff like this, that basically create these transmedia models of like building a narrative across many different mediums.
Like they have a film, but then also they have like comic books, or they also have like TV shows. Or
so not necessarily how it has then gone into the arts, but basically how it originated in entertainment media.
And
well, they're all interoperable now,
they're
right?
all,
It's
and
like
it's all the same, basically. Yeah,
Yep.
because you can now with like AI models, you can very easily just like type.
Turn the text into a
an
podcast,
image,
into a video,
exactly,
into a
it's all one
pop song.
basically,
Yeah,
and they can all be read.
yeah. But in terms of identity building in that kind of space, I mean, it's. I don't know. Do you have a?
I mean, do you mean identity building as in like character building, or do you mean in terms of like one's
How
personal
identity is
embodied
expressed?
identity?
Yeah, maybe like even existing in that sort
Yeah.
mode, like existing in a transmedia mode, or existing with a transmedia identity. I don't know.
Well, you talked about like many different becoming many different
different-
users
right.
at once, for
Right.
example. Could that be?
Yeah, I want to bring in Jay Springett's great description here of how a user relates to a person relates to their users. You know, if in the linear media organization, you as the reader were the authentic person, like whatever, reading the skateboard magazine or something, and you were the skater and you were reading it because you were really a skater and not a poser. And then by the time you get to when you're in network media, you are kind of authentically yourself, but you're professionalized yourself, right? Classic theory. Like you professionalized yourself. You've incorporated this like thing, this user. You've wrapped yourself in a user so that you can interface in that space. And you're probably presenting whatever your specific identity is. You're online, and you're like, I am like a woman who's like, I don't know, like lives in Vienna and is well educated, and this is my thought based on you're representing yourself relatively truthfully. And that was sort of the expectation. But maybe you had an alt profile, maybe you had a Finsta, maybe you would play a little bit with some other kinds of identity. And now I think we're entering a mode where, because of the way that like authorship works and truth works and all this stuff works within like model generation, you can embody many different kinds of users, and it's okay. To bring up Jay Springett's point, you like puppet a user. So you can be like really obsessed with, I don't know, like black metal or something. And then you're like, maybe that doesn't look like what you would do in your normal life, but maybe you're really like, you love it, and you sort of have this identity online where you like are in the chats. You can like authentically, like you can earnestly, like non-ironically go in and be that subject. And I think that's interesting. And the next day you could also be like really into opera, and you could have these different, you could have these different personalities that you would really, you would puppet, and you would earnestly puppet it. So it doesn't even come into a question of authenticity, so long as you like, showing up to a LARP and like really being in character, like that matters. I mean, when you think of the January 6th protesters, you almost feel, I don't feel sorry for them. It's really stupid, but I mean, they like really believed in the characters they were playing in that LARP. That was like a game space for them. They were showing up. They were like full on there to make it real. And like, it was almost like a promise was broken when they realized they were going to actually get arrested. Because
like a mass derealization event or something.
Exactly. So they were like puppeting this thing, and maybe they go home to their jobs as teachers, or I don't know, like I don't know, whatever they do. Those guys did, and yeah, they had it was like a breakdown. But I think now you can be more fluid with your identity. I think in these digital spaces.
But even though we're kind of they're trying to regulate like one identity per social media platform, like blockchain the user so that you know where they've been, where they're going. Like, how does that stand up against what you're proposing?
That's true. I mean, I think there's going to be, I don't know. I mean, it'll be like proliferation of profiles or...
Well, but the thing is, I think as, we're already seeing like this like flood of AI generated content and slop and brain rot, et cetera, a flood of bots like Twitter, unless you like are just really excited about like LARPing like Nazi world and like migrant crime sizzle reels, like it's not a useful place anymore. And I think the internet is probably, with AI just the accessibility exploding, it's probably going to end up shifting and looking very different in the next couple of years. And I imagine I don't know how social media is going to work in this context. I think probably what will happen is machine learning algorithms will like narrow the kind of flow you're in so that you actually are kind of, and the path defined for you ends up being a smaller path through it. I think in general, the internet is going to feel a bit smaller and a bit less like you're just like afloat in this mass of billion users. I think a lot of the language, like the lexicon around defining one's identity, gender, sexual orientation, etc., I think that lexicon really came out of the fact of this like need to be able to define oneself in a machine legible way in a overwhelming kind of an overwhelming just like mass platform that's also very low resolution, where you can't, those things aren't kind of implicit in the way they would be face to face, or they don't operate the same way. It's almost like you use them to be able to signal where you belong and also help navigate kind of hierarchies of privilege or marginalization. And I think as that kind of just being in this giant mass kind of starts to break apart, I think in a way your identity will be a bit more reflective of yourself on the smaller scales of the internet. I think also, there'll probably be like new micro internets, a lot more walled gardens, a lot more kind of protected spaces so that you can actually access information instead of like trying to Google something today, which like doesn't even work. And I think you'll have on one hand a very fluid space where you can kind of be or do whatever you want. And then on the other end, I think we'll kind of get back to almost what feels like an earlier part of the internet, where maybe you're a non, or maybe you're just you, and you don't feel this compulsion to need to like signal and define and categorize yourself in all of these ways that I think really were driven by a need to be machine legible and to try to translate all of the like complexity and nuance of identity into a into a computational machinic space. If that helps add anything.
Does anyone else want to ask a question or offer a comment? Yeah.
It's a bit poetic, but you showed like Slavoj Žižek, Abercrombie and Fitch campaign, so it made me think also TMI about Grindr as a platform, because like it has a bad reputation, but somehow it's like more direct. Also the way I use it, I delete it every time. It's like this one purpose thing, almost like an internet computer, like in this idea that you like have one purpose and you open your user and you delete it when you no longer want it. And I kind of feel about the identities and about the question that is somehow like when I use it and talk with people and this kind of reduction, and it's based on location, it's more, I don't have a word for this, but maybe you have.
I mean, it did make me think of one thing that, I think these kinds of disposable identities, you're probably right, will be more possible, because I think there is going to be kind of an arms race between AIs where, a kind of filtering AI versus all of the slop that's being generated so that you can actually have a useful internet. But if it gets to the point where you can spin up an identity for a specific purpose, and maybe with machine learning agents, you are able to quickly and effectively get to where you want to go and do what you want to do. I think that's absolutely possible. And I think, that opens up a whole new range of possibilities, I think, as well, to experiment with different forms of identity. And
kind of like a dark ramification of the internet.
Yeah.
Like there will be like a realm that will operate that way, right?
That's true, yeah.
It's kind of, you're not exactly an anon, but like you do have a character, you do have like a sensibility to you, but it's not something that you need to like take outside elsewhere.
I one of my clearest internet memories is like my one day on Second Life.
I remember being on Second Life too for like one day. Yeah, it's true.
And so I think maybe you could have like all of these kind of rich experiences just by spinning up an identity for a day and exploring a very particular path through the internet. Because this is a very Joe Rogan take, but I was just thinking about how no two people experience the same internet. Like the path of clicks, the posts you look at, the people you engage with, like that's as unique as your DNA. Nobody's in the same internet. So.
But actually related to that, I was thinking also about the Architecture Biennale, which there's an app that you use. Has anyone been to the Venice Biennale? Is anyone coming from there? Okay, cool. Did you use the app? Was it operative?
No, I hate apps to navigate art exhibitions. I don't want to know about them.
Okay, well, sorry, but I'm going to say, at least in its ideal, I like the idea that you would cut a desire path through an exhibition as opposed to like dutifully going through in a linear way. Like we're all trained to go through an exhibition from the beginning to the end. But it was quite explicit that you would cut a desire path through. And no one has the same internet. No one like follows the same path. But enough people follow a similar path that it's possible that like to cut through all of this noise, there are going to be new desire paths that are cut, especially because like if you think of neural media, it's like media reading you as opposed to you reading the news. It's like this information infrastructure reading you and kind of putting out a path in front of you, which has its problems. But maybe we end up with like a weirdly user-directed, maybe there is some kind of agency, it has to be coded into the system, but like that app, I think that was the idea, right?
Yeah, I think
to facilitate desire paths.
This doesn't expand on what you say, but I think there's something in the fact that like Instagram is full of these weird AI videos of like these just like mutant human animal hybrids, what they do is they take a video of an animal and then make the animal human, but like it looks just like a grotesque kind of mutant. But of course, like
that's your feed. That's your feed. That's your internet.
Yeah, well,
that's
right.
Yours.
But
I'm like,
wait, you haven't seen? You know what I'm talking about, right? No? Okay.
No, like a while ago, my wife picked up my phone. She was like, "Man, the algorithm thinks you're an asshole." Like.
Well, but I think there is something about there's some desire path being drawn right now to this kind of like hybrid human or mutant human, and I think there's some resonance with that to the way this kind of the cyborgness of the way we're engaging with the internet now is just getting intensified. But I don't know.
We're always melding with our media form.
Well,
so
of course.
I don't take it as a state of exception. I just am curious, like, who replaces that figure? I don't know if there are any ideas here, but I am curious, like, who becomes that next figure? I don't think they actually look like the AI monster.
Well, they don't look like it, but yeah,
You know what I mean?
but
they're like that energy.
But scale is weird. It's not the same thing at every
That's true.
level,
That's
right?
actually very true.
And
that's very,
the
very
tricky
true.
thing
That's
about
very
it,
true.
because what is our relationship to the algorithms as they are now intensified could like look like operate in an entirely different way, and that's the tricky thing. And humans are really terrible at like understanding and comprehending changes in scale. And I mean, even scale itself, it's just kind of recently being like a kind of discourse, or like kind of formalizing and understanding about it is being teased out, but I think it's going to be increasingly important.
So perhaps we should end this scintillating conversation. I just wanted to pay a big compliment to your Abby Warburg style, like historical read of the Soy Face Wojak. It actually blew my mind. And I want to thank Julian for coming in and just really like enlivening, what was already a really incredible and like massively expansive presentation. I want to thank all you guys for sitting through it on a sunny afternoon. And I also want to invite you to the Reactor Theatre, if you can handle it, for another night of screening. That's at 7, and another lecture performance. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you
Jules.
all.
Thank you,
Thanks
Nidhi.
so much.
Ciao.
Ciao.